Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News channel, independent and impartial. Now this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndoro and this is what's coming up on the show. World Radio Day was marked last Thursday under the theme Radio and Diversity. Now we ask, how is that playing out in South Africa? We also take a look at community media, the role it plays in our lives and what is next given the digital disruptions that are becoming more and more commonplace. In our look back in history spot, this helps us this week remember the legacy of one of South Africa's truly global music icons, Joseph Shabalala of Ladysmith Black Mambazo, who passed away this past Tuesday, aged 78. Our international editor slot takes us to Eswatini, where news editor Zweli Martin Dlamini tells us about quite an interesting week that he had. He was arrested yet again. We'll find out more about why and what it all means later on. That's the show, but remember you can engage with us on social media using the Twitter handle, #SABC Media Monitor, #SABC Media Monitor. We'd love to hear from you. Now, before we get into our highlighted stories on the program, let's first take a look at what's trending, what's happening on the front pages of your Sunday newspapers this morning. And these are your headlines on the Sunday Times. Well, their headline story involves the public protector who wants to clip the wings of the Zondo Commission. Yep, the paper says that Advocate Mkhwebane has made a surprise request in court to be allowed to help draft narrowed terms for the State Capture Commission for the rest of its hearings. And she's also saying that she could have done the job at a fraction of the cost. The City Press says that the Post Office is bleeding millions in money with the social grants due to delivery fees along with mismanagement. The paper says that money for beneficiaries is hanging in the balance. Apparently, the Post Office is losing 60 million rand a month from distributing social grants. The Sunday Independent is leading with a story that they're headlining is the CR's hit list. Apparently, at least 11 senior ANC members in the NEC, including current and former ministers, are targets of politically motivated criminal investigations for either not having supported President Ramaphosa at the ANC elective conference or are seen to be a threat to him. The Weekend Argus on Sunday is leading with the story of a Sansuchi Girls High School teacher who has to appear again in court for common assault after a grade 9 teacher slapped a pupil during an altercation. I'm sure you remember those images. This is after the charges against her, though, had been dropped last year, but the police have gone after her again without notice from the National Prosecuting Authority. The Sunday Tribune, well, the front page story there highlights an environmental disaster where residents in KwaZulu-Natal's north coast area of Moorland are having to deal with the stench of human waste, chemicals as well. This after Mdloti River seems to have been polluted by raw sewage. And the Sunday World, sadly this is a theme that comes up quite often. This is leading with allegations of rape claims against Bishop Stephen Zondo of the Rivers of Living Waters Ministries. He's accused of 2 counts of rape and another of sexual assault by female former church members. But get this, they were surprised to find out that these cases were withdrawn without their knowledge and on their behalf. All right, so that's the front pages of the newspapers. We'll take a look at some of those stories a little bit later on. But first, let's catch you up with what's trending on social media. And so these are the top 5 trends. Aaron Gordon, that's all to do with basketball. Blessed Sunday, usual story, kind of motivation. And the Sacred Space, that's Radio Metro with Tamin Gubena, and also Sunday Thoughts, obviously motivational thoughts. But number 3, a short while ago, is the one that's captured my attention, and that's on state-owned enterprises, because Tito Mboweni, Finance Minister, says, for example, what are citizens' view on whether we should continue bailing out SOEs or invest in the public tax money on roads and other public goods? So he wants a debate. In fact, he's even calling for a referendum. And of course, reaction has been coming in on both sides of this equation. Some people saying, hang on, if they're not making money, why do private people want to buy them? Other people are saying 18 months of load shedding and collapsing, and we're busy with nonsense. And economic freedom fighters always have something to say, don't they, of course? So the question is, and I suppose you're going to have to try and figure this out for yourself as well, what should we do with these SOEs? Should we sell them, privatize them, or keep them going, which might mean taxpayers bailing them out consistently? All right, so there's so much to get through on the show this morning, and helping us make sense of these stories are my guest editors. And today we have news editor at Soweto TV, Liuto Koza, and station manager at Voice of Wits, Nswaki Shweshwe. To both of you, thank you very much for joining us. Give us a wave. Hello, thanks so much for joining us. Right, so World Radio Day was celebrated this past week on the 13th of February. Instituted by UNESCO 9 years ago, it's a day to celebrate radio as a way of educating people, informing and promoting freedom of expression across cultures. Now, this year's theme for the day was radio and diversity. This is what the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres had to say about the day.
Radio brings people together. In an era of rapid media evolution, radio retains a special place in every community as an accessible source of vital news and information. But radio is also a source of innovation that pioneered interaction with audiences and user-generated content decades before they became mainstream. Radio offers a wonderful display of diversity in its formats, in its languages, and among radio professionals themselves. This sends an important message to the world. As we strive to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and tackle the climate crisis, radio has a key role to play as a source of information and inspiration alike. On this World Radio Day, let us recognize the enduring power of radio to promote diversity and help build a more peaceful and inclusive world.
All right, so that was the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. Well, here at home, our colleague Sakina Kamwendo caught up with the Minister of Communications, Stella Ndabeni-Abrahams, to find out what her thoughts were on the importance of World Radio Day.
Well, this is a very important day to us, not just as the people in the communication space, but for ordinary citizens in their respective areas. The first thing that we had said we really need to honor and celebrate this day is because it brings the multiplurality of voices, the diversity of our nation. Now people are able to get content in their own languages. And therefore we say, as President will be delivering his own State of the Nation address, 11 million people that will be having access to radio as I'm speaking to you, and we still plan to increase that. But most importantly, we want to encourage those radio stations that were licensed to use indigenous languages to continue using them, and not to just continue to broadcast on what is being broadcast, being copy, you know, that copy and paste environment, but them to generate their own stories that are reflective of their audience, to say, how do we help Umanyauza, who's at Sakela in Mthatha, to realize that there's hope, to realize that there are other people that are going through challenges, but most importantly to say she too has a role to play in our country.
All right, so let's get into this whole World Radio Day with our guest editors today. Thank you both for joining us. Great to have you. I think first time for you, Lieto, but you've always been with us, Nswaki. So let's talk a little bit about I suppose community radio as well, but world radio generally. In 2020, given the way we consume media, is there still a place for radio?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think if you look at the consumption of media, whether using the digital platforms or the traditional receiving a signal via radio and TV, radio still has a huge number of listeners. I do think there will come a time where the saturation of access to internet will eclipse the access to radio. But right now, what we're seeing with radio is that there are no barriers to entry with radio. You don't have to speak English, for example, to understand what comes out of Ukhozi FM or Umhlobo Wenene or Lesedi FM. And I think for a country like South Africa, where there's so much diversity in terms of us as a people and the languages that we speak, we're certainly going to see radio around for a very long time. And also because I think, yes, there are challenges, especially in the urban areas where we see that there's copying and pasting, as the minister said earlier on. But if you look at the community radio sector and the PBS stations, they do deal with issues that are hyper-local. So they affect the communities that they are communicating with. And that kind of information, unfortunately at the moment, you can't get easily on the internet.
We'll talk about the community element a little bit later on, because I wanted to talk about community media separately, but just radio in general. I mean, Leto, you've worked both television and radio. Yes. What sets radio apart, do you think, from other media?
Well, I think I've been since I was a kid. I know radio is very current. It's now, and so it communicates the messages that we want to hear, whether it's news, whether it's you listening to Lesedi FM. I mean, I grew up in Lesotho, and then I came to South Africa, and that's the only radio station I knew, because as someone who wanted to do journalism in the country where I come from, there's very little space to be able to do that. And it's part of you expressing yourself, being able to allow your views to go out there. So in South Africa, that's actually happening. Yeah. But when you see, like Shosho was saying, is that we live in communities where there's lots of social ills, there's lots of issues that we actually close by. So to be able to actually say, no, these are the issues, like with what we do. When I was with 702, the people that interacted with us knew definitely sure that the issues that they raised would actually be able to address. And there was national interest issues, there was community issues. I mean, we did a lot of stories, and even for protests, we've seen the rise because we are the ability for us to be able to go out there and cover those stories. Yeah. It's very quick in communicating those stories to the entire nation, and we actually go back to social media to see how we can actually interact. So we are at actually a very interesting time where we find an alignment or synchronizing the content and being able to say this is what we can do and how best can we actually improve the content that we offer to the communities.
Especially, I guess also the other thing is, because radio is much cheaper to produce than television, and delivery is much easier, the reach. I mean, when I think about the number of people who listen to Ukhozi FM, for example, it's phenomenal, the amount of people that can be reached by radio. And this perhaps is one of the reasons why it's going to be there for some time still.
Well, according to statistics, there's always contention around the BRC data, but we have 34 million listeners of radio. Ukhozi has the highest number of audiences, and it's that reach that you wouldn't be able to reach through other platforms. Yes, you can start comparing Ukhozi and SABC 1, for example, and talk about TV, but there's something that radio has that TV or any other visual platform wouldn't be able to do. And I want to use this example of, if you have a child and you hear the sound of this child crying, you almost drop everything and you want to find where the child is. TV is more like you see the child crying, or they just fell. You can make a decision immediately to say, I need to attend to this. So there's something that about sound that makes it appeal to our emotions, and we're more listening intuitively than we do when we are watching something or we reading something. So radio is very unique in the offering that it has. And yes, I know we maybe want to talk about podcasting that's come in, also offering a service that's almost parallel to what radio is doing. But in the current state that we're in as a country in South Africa, and obviously I'm very much in love with radio, I see radio growing, and I think, like Leto was saying, we are able to integrate and innovate using technology that's, these development that are coming with the 4IR into what we're doing using radio. And yes, radio is way cheaper. You can run out and get a story, collect sound, file it to studio, while on TV, for example, you still have to edit, you still have to... so there are challenges, obviously, with the kind of empowerment you'd also need to have as a radio journalist going out onto the field, and the demands that comes with it in this current digital age where people are looking for more than just sound in stories.
This year's theme is radio and diversity. Do you think that radio in South Africa has paid service to the diversity issue?
Well, look at the SABC, for instance. When we grew up, we listened to Kosi Lesedi FM, and my language retention, when you look at my Sesotho, is still very intact. And you look at now how we somehow there was a way for people to move away from using your mother tongue. So we go to universities and you want to come back and you want to work for Metro and all of that. But when you look at the South Africa as a country, we are able to take the same content, use it differently according to different segments of the country. So I think it is still very important, and we need to, in fact, now to work harder to make sure that we retain the languages, we preserve, that's the word I'm looking for, preserve the heritage of our languages, of the content that we need to show. Yes, we do have lots of facets, and it's a multi-layered approach that we need to do, but together with the government as well. I mean, a lot of community radios are struggling, and it somehow dilutes their vision, because sometimes it's like if there are financial constraints in whatever they're trying to do, that begins to sort of like set a bit of a bitter tone for them in terms of being able to carry the mandate explicitly so to the people.
All right. Shweshwe, I guess, when we talk about diversity, we almost automatically go towards languages and cultures. But sometimes the people that get left behind are people with disabilities. And also, when they start moving around Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, there's a new kind of cosmopolitan, Pan-African feeling that's out there. Is that being reflected properly on radio?
At this present moment, I'd say there are some pockets of excellence there, but I think we're still struggling generally to diversify as radio. So you do still have, sounds that are quite similar when you listen from breakfast at one radio station to another radio station. We do need to get to a point where we hear a more diverse voices on the radio. I think when you look at a city like Johannesburg, for example, there's so many people coming from so many different areas, and we should be able to reflect that. And yes, it's often the issue of language, because that's easiest for us to do, in that we can just, we can just pick someone who speaks Sesotho. But what about someone who comes from, or is it someone who comes from Zambia, for example? Do they have an equal opportunity to get onto a radio station in South Africa? And can we hear those views? And I'm not saying they are not there. I'm just saying we can definitely do a lot more than just say, oh, it's diversity, we're going to just do it one time. It's Africa Month, we'll do it now. We're focusing on issues relating to diversity. We'll bring in people living with disabilities. We need to we need to have them on these radio stations, not as guests, have their own shows. In that way, I think we'll also be addressing a lot of the other challenges that we face as a country in incorporating our diversity in the sound of the radio stations and the media in general. All
right, so we're running out of time in this area, but the future is happening, and it's happening much quicker than ever before. And very briefly, both of you, as it's getting disrupted, I'm starting to find that radio, television, and digital social media platforms are all starting to merge. I'm seeing video on radio channels, on online, and what's going to be the future then? I mean, is it going to be called radio or called something else?
Well, I think that there is now an insatiable appetite, I think especially from the communities as well, because you are listening to radio, your breakfast show, something breaks on social media, and it's already on TV, but you have then the tutor, what that would actually just be able to bring. So people somehow are scattered all over the place to trying to find ways, and people do know where they, to find it sort of like good stuff, and stuff breaks all the time, but we need to be at least 10 years ahead as well in terms of being able to plan for those tastes. And in South Africa in particular, we are at the very strategic position that we can actually be able to lead that paradigm.
Very briefly, because I've got to move on.
I think for me, we need to move to the digital, we need to see that digital migration happen. At this present moment, yes, there is convergence, and yes, it's not going to be radio, it's not going to be FM, but we will still get stories in sound. So we have to innovate as technology goes on.
All right, okay, we're going to chat a little bit more, but slightly focused on community media coming up shortly. So stay with us. Community media is our next topic, and that's coming up right after this.
Your business is big business to you, and with the new Telkom Biz Expander, you can make it even bigger. Get wireless LTE internet with 160 gigs of data and your choice of voice service from as little as $9.99 per month. You can also create an enhanced digital presence for your business by choosing Yellow My Start for just $5.99 per month. To get Biz Expander, call 10213, click telkom.co.za, or go to any Telkom shop.
The World Health Organization has urged countries to make preparations to deal with possible cases of the coronavirus.
China's new confirmed infections from the coronavirus outbreak increased by a daily record to top 14,000.
These 213 people have died from the virus in China.
There are now around 17,500 confirmed cases of infections and over 360 deaths.
The mask that you wear, that in fact carries the biggest protection you have.
Countries rapidly respond to the virus by shutting down their borders to China.
2,000 people are being kept under observation in Kerala in hospitals and homes.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, most of us grew up with what's commonly referred to as mass media. That's those few TV channels, national and radio stations and regional radio stations, and of course, your daily and weekly newspapers and magazines. Well, over time, more and more community media has been coming to the fore. For example, in 1994, there were no community radio stations at all. And today, well, there are well over 200 stations, and that's with community television also making strides across the country. But what role does community media play in society, especially with the fourth industrial revolution and all of its technological innovations? What does the future hold for this localized media? Let's find out once again from our guest editors. All right, so both of you involved in community media, Leota, community television, and Shweshwe, community radio on campus in particular. Let me start with you, because community television is not that old in South Africa, and there's not many of them around. But is there a place for community television? What do you get from community TV that you wouldn't get from SABC, for example?
Well, if you want to understand that question, you just need to look at the American media landscape. They are very good when it comes to regional media house that is able to focus on that area and, just disseminate information to the people. We are Soweto TV, and, one of the first community radio TV stations, rather, in the country. So we are in Soweto. When you look at the history of Soweto, the challenges that Soweto presents and all of those things, a lot of these issues sometimes would not make it to SABC, ENCA and all of that. But what we're trying to say is we are at the very interesting position to tell stories the way we see them. We are able to set trends. We are able to build scenarios around that. And to also give young people an opportunity to become journalists, because it's very hard to become an outright journalist in the modern times where we live in, because it's not a well-paying job. But we do stay in those communities. But the important element here is that when we are there, we are able to report on whatever issues that are there, and those issues actually...
What do you find that your viewers want to hear about and see on your screens?
Beautiful content. I mean, people like to see themselves on TV, and most of them you find young entrepreneurs who are doing great work that has a lot to do in terms of corporate social investment. So we're doing all of these things. We are showcasing their work. We are showcasing or highlighting some of the issues for government also to be able to respond, because we also work quite closely with government, departments, where we are able to say if there is a health issue that is currently happening or that society is grappling with. We are at the forefront of that, to be able to tell the story differently and use that medium to tell a story that is different, tell a story of hope, and try harder to actually re-angle those stories to be able to make sure that we represent Soweto well and the entire nation as well, I think.
Right. And Shweshwe, I guess some of what he's saying resonates with you as well. Your community is quite specific, I guess. It's on campus, students and other people get to tune in as well. What does community radio mean to you, and what are you trying to do?
When I started my career as being a broadcast journalist, I did come through a community radio station, and over and above providing those opportunities for young people to be able to be trained, because communities are more forgiving at that level. They expect you to make some mistakes. And the SABC you were comparing, very unforgiving. You make one mistake, it's trending, and so over and above providing those opportunities is that what we also need to do is to be able to give voice to the communities that we broadcast into. VOW FM, based at the University of the Witwatersrand, for example, is not just servicing the students within the university, it's also servicing the community around the city of Johannesburg. And what's important is that we bring the issues that affect those people in those communities onto the platform. And because this is a regulated space, the obligations on our side as community stations is that we need to serve these communities. And our challenge, and we always talk about this one, is that we don't have resources. We don't have 5 journalists that can go out and look at stories that are happening in the city of Johannesburg and bring to on air. And that's just one of the big problems that we have. And something that I do want to say, Peter, that's important is that while community radio was licensed from 1994, there were community radio stations before 1994. There were pirate stations, and these were still popular because they still provided a service in those communities that we have. What we needed to have done, and I do want to urge the President and the Minister of Communications, is that we need to empower these community media houses, both TV, radio and print, whether through the department or through GCIS or through the MDDA, is that for us to be able to fulfill our mandate as media houses serving the community, we need to have resources. And I speak for most of these community media
because sadly a lot of them have come and gone over time, haven't they? We've seen struggling finances. But is there an audience? Because if there is an audience, that would translate into advertising and other benefits. So what is it? Is it that people don't want to listen to community radio, or what's going on?
There's definitely an audience, Peter, and we do sell radio advertising. But the cost of operating a studio versus how much you can bring in revenue will not be able to take you to a position where you're able to sustain a community radio station. And yes, we can talk about whether the audience is enough, and also when we take our offering to the market, they're saying, but I can get Ukozi to sell this. And yes, their rates will be higher, but I'll get a higher reach. And you offering me a niche market. So, which means that businesses around where community medias are need to be supportive towards those radio stations and community stations. And I think what we need to do also as people within this community media spaces is we need to be going out and we need to actively seek support from businesses in our communities and say, you are in our area, we need your support. Come and advertise with us. We speak to this community that you're looking to speak to, and that will help us become more sustainable. But even that will not be enough.
Yeah, I see you nodding there.
Yeah, look, I think she's touching on something very important, which is resources. You find that you have 6 stories to cover a day, and you have 2 bulletins to cover, and you only have 2 cameras or 1. Wow. And it's either you have to, and you only have 2 cars. You know, you doing this work requires that sometimes you have to be so generous that I use my car to report. I would say to journalists, take my car, go there, and then I would sort of like be here to be. So it requires you to go beyond the call of duty in terms of the work so that the work can get delivered. And you need people who are dedicated to be able to do that, and partnerships with the communities as well. It is vitally important because if we do have local newspapers, and we have a lot of them in Soweto and Ekurhuleni and all of that, is to be able to say, how do we then make sure that we partner so that we can cut the costs? Because if you are a Ekurhuleni newspaper and we can take half of your content, use your journalists to be able to be on TV, and this is so it requires coordinated planning, it requires concerted efforts, both so that when people come in to be able to buy space to advertise, we are also be able to engage them and say, this is what we do. So that's what we've been struggling with, resources, but we are not giving up on it because it's important. We are closer to a lot of issues that are happening, and we need to be able to be at that stage to be able to articulate those views.
And I guess, you know, this whole thing about local is lekker kind of scenario. But again, you know, in my complex where I live, they drop off these newspapers, and I see them stacked, and they so what's going wrong? Is it that people just are not reading, or they're not interested in local newspapers? What do you think it might be?
Well, I think the environment around complexes where you stay is quite different because there's no interaction between the person delivering the newspaper, for example, and you. You just see the stacks of the papers, you will see stacks of magazines there. So there is a challenge of access to those communities. And again, it means over and above saying we'll drop the stack of newspapers at the gate, as the community media operators, we need to go into these complexes and interact with the communities. But if you look at other areas where there are local newspapers in some townships, this including the Caxton newspapers, which we can't really say are community, but they do serve a community market where they are able to interact with people. There is a higher uptake, but in the complexes, it's harder. But there's definitely an appetite for reading local newspapers. Stories often come from there and make it to our national and regional publications. So there's a very important work that is done there and that is serviced. And I do want to urge you to take at least 5 of those newspapers when you go into your complex and give them to your neighbors.
Or even, I think what we're trying to do also is, if you sit like we're sitting now and we do some newspaper reviews and we look at all of these things, is to be able to also to incorporate them. Because if they are not out there, we are White City newspaper, it's in Soweto, but we're talking about other newspaper headlines and all of that. So you work with them to give them an extra motivation and a boost. Because remember, these are also prepared by people who want to also make it big in the journalism space. So that becomes also a training ground for us to be able to say, we are in this, we are occupying a very important gate into something bigger. So that's where, like she was saying, you make mistakes, but we can get away with those mistakes. But it allows you, it gives you enough margin to grow, and there's space for growth there. And when we teach these young people from as early as maybe grade 11, work with them so that they understand exactly what needs to happen. And as soon as we can gain that momentum, we would actually be able to deliver a lot of things, because people also want to see their work on TV, on the newspapers as well.
All right, a question for both of you. Local government elections are on the horizon, and I would imagine that community radio, television, this is a really important time because this is you on the ground now, giving people an opportunity to make informed choices.
I think what's also very important for us to look at is how South Africans in general treat local government elections. And I think, yes, the media has a big role to play in informing and educating the public about why local government is perhaps even more important than the local elections, because it deals with issues that affect us in our communities. And yes, for us as community media houses, it's very important to be there and be giving the community the news that they need and bringing in the local councillors that are looking to be voted for into power. I think it's a very exciting time, and I think as a community radio station, Voice of Vets via FM, we're looking forward to being able to not just work within our community, but also link with other community radio stations across the country. And I think with what Leah was saying is that we should look beyond just radio and TV and newspapers. We should look at how do we bring the community media sector together to say, if you've worked on this story, can I use your story on my platform? And how can we do that better? Because in community radio, we do see that happening where community radio stations are sharing stories, but it hasn't really gone to other media platforms. But the local government elections are definitely something that's very important for us.
Very briefly.
Well, I think for us it's very important because remember, we work with communities there. With our stories that we cover, we are also trying to hold the government accountable. And if the people are aware of the content that we offer, that also becomes part of campaigning. But sometimes you see that we leave it until very late when now the big players are also in there and sort of like they then obviously obscure our work. So this is our time to be able to do that consistently so that when they come, we know exactly what we've done.
All right. Well, I wish you strength to both of you because you have a critically important role to play, particularly in our politics and, as you say, local management of our local municipalities. All right, we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we'll start taking a look at some of the stories in the papers and internationally as well. Stay with us.
We've got more children at bodies laying in the streets than we have adults. And that's the saddest part of it all.
Those people won't get the message that we really want to say enough is enough.
When I took 30K, I wanted to invest it in Forex.
If you're using foreign exchange just to try and make money, you're essentially gambling.
If I had a recipe to constantly make money on every single trade, why would I want to sell that?
The same people who are producing the food, they go and sleep without food.
This guy signed, he produced the fraudulent pay slips. This is the ID copy he used. This is not me.
Special assignment, 9:30 on SABC News.
Is Pravin Gordon going?
That is really the prerogative of the sitting president of the republic.
While considering what is the best deployment, not to fall into the trap of manufactured narratives.
There is a crisis in the ANC and a crisis impact on SOEs. The crisis in the ANC is not going to be resolved over the next 3 or 5 years.
Should we letting SAA continue or should we be looking at restructuring?
If we continue with a general restructuring plan, it will actually incur another 6 billion per annum.
You're a business rescue specialist. Does it make the job difficult?
You'd be lucky to be in a business rescue where you are not second-guessed by the creditors. The unique situation that they find themselves in now is that it's a business rescue of an SOE.
The EFF or any other political party in this country do not dictate a program for the ANC.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. Now, this past week, iconic founder and leader of and musical director of the award-winning vocal group Ladysmith Black Mambazo passed away. Joseph Shabalala died on Tuesday, aged 78, leaving behind a legacy of achievement that few will ever be able to emulate. Shabalala created and guided Ladysmith Black Mambazo with their powerful and distinctive harmonies to massive popularity in South Africa from the 70s and then globally after their collaboration with Paul Simon in the 80s. The group went on to win 5 Grammy Awards, releasing more than 50 albums in the process as well, and nominated for 17 others. Well, in our news archive slot today, we take you back to 2005 when Ladysmith Black Mambazo was nominated for a 2nd Grammy Award, which they would go on to win for Best Traditional World Music Album. This is how the SABC covered the story on the day.
Are they going to bring home another Grammy? Ladysmith Black Mambazo has been nominated in 2 categories for their album Raise Your Spirit Higher. The ceremony will take place in Los Angeles at 3 o'clock tomorrow morning, South African time. The group has sold over 6 million albums, making it the #1 record-selling group in Africa. In a career spanning 30 years, they've been nominated for 9 Grammys. In 1987, they won a Grammy for the album Shaka Zulu in the category Best Traditional Folk Recording. Far from its humble beginnings, Ladysmith Black Mambazo has performed with the world's best, including Paul Simon, Stevie Wonder and Dolly Parton. They also collaborated on a play about apartheid South Africa and a musical based on Shabalala's first song called Nomathemba.
From the foothills of the Drakensberg to the Big Apple, the music of Ladysmith Black Mambazo has entertained audiences around the world. It all started in the 60s with Joseph Shabalala. He had a harmony in a dream and got members of his family to form Ladysmith Black Mambazo. American singer Paul Simon was captivated by their music and helped them conquer the international music scene. They've performed for Nelson Mandela, the Queen of England and at 2 Nobel Peace Prize ceremonies. Now the 10-member group has been nominated again, this time in the categories of Best Traditional World Music and Best Surround Sound Album for Raise Your Spirit Higher. The album's release coincided with South Africa's 10-year democracy celebrations. It held the #1 spot on Billboard's World Music Chart for several months. South Africans will be asleep when the winners of the 47th Annual Grammy Awards are called out early tomorrow morning. And hopefully, Ladysmith Black Mambazo will come home with diamonds on the soles of their shoes. Mariska Noble, SABC.
And they certainly did come back with the Grammy that year. And they went on to win 3 others, so 5 in total. And whilst Ladysmith Black Mambazo continues, may Joseph Shabalala's soul rest in peace. Now, the global human rights NGO Amnesty International says that a surge in violent attacks, threats, harassment and intimidation of media workers is entrenching Somalia as one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a journalist. In their report, We Live in Perpetual Fear, Amnesty says that it's been able to document dramatic deterioration in the freedom of expression and the media's ability to do its work since President Mohamed Abdullah Farmajo took office in February 2017. Journalists have come under attack from both Al-Shabaab and government security forces, with increases in censorship and arbitrary arrests. A number of journalists have had to flee the country. At least 8 journalists have been killed in Somalia during President Farmajo's administration. To West Africa now, the Committee to Protect Journalists is reporting how Nigeria's police is using telecom surveillance to lure and arrest journalists. CPJ says that police from across Nigeria use phone records to find people connected to journalists facing criminal charges for their work. Now, in each case, police use call records that they claim to have obtained from cell phone network providers to identify people with a relationship to targeted journalists. They then detain those people and force them to facilitate the arrests. Reporters for Nigeria's premium Times newspaper Samuel Ogondipe and Azizat Adegba told CPJ they had no idea that their conversations were being monitored. Other journalists, Gidado Yasho and Alfred Olufeni, were caught in the same way. Yishao, publisher of the News Digest website, and Olufemi, a freelance reporter, were charged in November 2019 with criminal conspiracy and criminal defamation. All right, so we continue looking at some stories across the continent. And today, for our international editor slot, we head to the Kingdom of Eswatini, where the editor of Swaziland News, Zweli, Martin Dlamini, joins us now on the line. A very good morning to you, Zweli. Thanks very much for joining us. It's been quite a week for you. You were arrested, but I spoke to the spokesperson of the Eswatini Royal Police, and they say that the reason you were arrested is because you were in contempt of court. You were meant to appear in court, and you just didn't show up.
Yes, Peter. It's true that I was arrested, but the fact of the matter is that the police were instructed by Princess Kanyiso, the Minister of Communications, who threatened me with death and imprisonment just a night before the arrest. So it's true that I was charged with contempt of court, but the connection between the text messages that was sent to me by the King's daughter confirmed that this matter was then politicized. In fact, it was a personal matter involving a land in my home area. When I came back from exile, I found that some of the traditional authorities here were trying to grab my land, which was allocated to me by my grandfather. So there was a minor dispute over that matter.
But that minor dispute, they say that you threatened to kill and shoot someone over this issue. Did that happen?
That one has to be proven in court, Peter. You know, when you work like a journalist, just like I do, people like to exaggerate matters so that they can fix you at political level. So I think that one need to be proven in the court, so I will not delve much on it.
Why didn't you go to court as well? Surely showing up would have been better?
Oh, okay, Peter. There was a minor communication breakdown between me and my lawyer regarding the date which I was supposed to be in court. So when I go to court, I found that a warrant of arrest has already been issued. But fortunately, when I appeared in court on Monday, we explained that to the judicial officer, the presiding officer, and I was then released because the court understood the communication breakdown as explained by my lawyer.
All right, so you're saying the King's daughter threatened you on your phone, sending you a message. What was she so upset about?
We exposed her regarding her alleged plot to take control of government. The minister is in charge of the communication ministry, and we gathered information that she was now elevating herself to be above the prime minister, thus causing a serious division in cabinet, because some of the cabinet ministers are now loyal to her, while some are loyal to the current prime minister. So our story was based on those lines, because she was now regarding herself as the third most senior person in the country, far above the prime minister. So she was upset that we exposed that.
All right. I know that another story that you've been working on involves China Bank.
The one we published just last night.
Yeah.
Yes, that one is about African Bank. In fact, Eswatini applied for a loan from that bank, and then we were investigating the links between the bank and China, because currently there's serious tension between the mainland China and the Kingdom of Eswatini. So mostly institutions and countries linked to the mainland China are said to be working towards isolating the Kingdom of Eswatini.
All right. And has the coronavirus made an appearance in Eswatini?
Yes, the government has confirmed the first case of coronavirus here in the Kingdom of Eswatini, and the Director of Health Services, Dr. Vusimakakula, has released a statement confirming that indeed it's true, but he clarified that they are monitoring this case and other reported cases of coronavirus.
All right, Zweli, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks very much indeed for joining us, and we'll keep in touch with you to see how things play out there. That's Zweli Martin Dlamini, who's the editor of the Swaziland Times, Swaziland News online publication, arrested this past week. He's accused of contempt of court. He says that it was a misunderstanding between him and his lawyer, and that once they did appear in court, he was allowed to go. And of course, this case relating to a dispute over land. Now, let's take a look at this morning's newspaper headlines here in South Africa with my guest editors. All right, so let me start with you, Shweshwe. What story grabbed your attention? Which paper?
So this is the City Press, and their story here on the front page is social grants lead post office. And you spoke about this earlier on in the when you're doing the headlines, that the post office is struggling because they are bleeding money from taking up that contract to be distributing those social grants. And I think here is a case where the post office might have underestimated the work and the resources required to distribute these grants. And now the post office is placed in a place where they are losing money, but we can't not service the people that need the social grants. So again, we need to go back. Is government going to have to come in again and assist? But the post office is also not like the previous service provider.
CPS.
Yes. This is a government institution in a way, So there is some responsibility that, you might feel taxpayers have.
So people will say, how is it the CPS could have done it at a profit and the post office can't do it?
Remember the whole issue when they were bidding for it. It took quite some time, a long time in terms of for them to be able to tick all the boxes. Even if they did, for me, I still think they needed to at least, had given them, some time to be able to actually get into the space, maybe for another 5 years to say, you're in the infancy stage, so this is how we actually going to monitor the whole process around, because just to be able to pull out, and also Mark, the former CEO who was spearheading the project, resigned. So that actually left them very vulnerable. So then you are now seeing the issue now of SASSA now back again. Now we have to now then re-look at other different ways of doing it.
60 million rand a month just on
security costs.
But I also want to say that, they've only recently just taken up this contract. I'm not sure if we're expecting them to immediately generate profits. I think the concern was we have to make sure.
Even. I don't even think
it's for us to pass that judgment to say they are unable to do so. It also needs they need to be capacitated to be able to do all of that. So
in the meantime, you and I, taquepayers, we're paying for Tingo.
Yes.
All right. What grabbed your attention?
Which
paper?
I'm looking at the Sunday Times.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of interesting, but I'm looking at a very interesting story. The finance minister.
Yes.
He now has a very tough task ahead of him to be able then to articulate some of the plans that the president spoke about. And this is actually going to be one of the most watched budget speech, because now we're looking at
we had this conversation this time last year.
Look, but I think for me is, even on Thursday, we were waiting for the president to speak because we wanted to know the content of his speech. So when the finance minister comes in now, we want to know what's going to happen on ESCOM. We want to know what's going to happen on the economy is struggling. The SOEs that are actually now costing the country billions and billions of rands every year.
I want us to stay with the Sunday Times. Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane, do you think that this is just going to create more drama for her? She wants to... the Zondo Commission narrowed, and also she says she could have done it cheaper.
Yeah, Yeah, I think she is bringing attention to her office, and it might be unnecessary or necessarily. That's her decision to make. But I think if you look at the nature of a commission, and the role of the Office of the Public Protector, you'll see that the responsibilities are quite different. So the Commission's work is to provide information to President, it will be President Cyril Ramaphosa in this case, to say these are the recommendations we've made based on what we've done here, and then he will then act on those recommendations. Her work is very specific. So I'm not sure whether, I'm not sure what she would achieve by wanting to narrow the terms of the commission, and we're so far ahead into this commission, which has overran its time. Now we're looking at, so I'm not sure what she hopes to achieve.
And I suppose this might be more fuel to get rid of her.
No, that's the thing. For me, I think this is actually just as not today, so she needs to go. But also there, see, the commission has also been seen as a filter for people to settle political scores, and for her to also be able to interfere in that space as well, to say this has
doesn't help.
This actually has gone for far too long now. We need to find ways to make sure that we cut it somehow, or find a cheaper way to be able to do it. And it's still going to continue. We have a very tough year ahead of us in terms of being, I mean, this country, a lot of government has spent so much money on litigation, and that on its own, it's a lot of people are actually not even aware, but it becomes an interesting insertion into the debate.
Unfortunately, these things go by so quickly, and that's where we're going to have to leave it. So, Nswaki, thanks so much indeed for joining us. And Lido Koza, thanks so much for joining us for the first time. We look forward to having you on the program again in the future.
Thank you for having me.
And for you at home, thank you so much for watching Media Monitor. I hope that you enjoyed the program, and you'll join us again at the same time, same place next week for more of the same. Take care. Have a wonderful week ahead, everybody. Bye-bye. Taking a look at how the youth consume news.
I prefer using social networks for information. I happen to find reading news on my cell phone more convenient than reading news in newspapers. I do follow various news sites there, and I get the links to their news articles that I read every single day.
I prefer using the net to watch to get the news because of it's convenient.
Watch Media Monitor Sundays at 9 a.m.
We've got more children